I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello, everyone,
Hi.
and welcome to a special tabletop episode of Arcane Mark. Today, here on Table Talk, we are going to be talking about the Cosmere RPG, which is, at the time of this live episode, just about through with their Kickstarter. We're going to try to help you figure out, should you back the Cosmere RPG? And I think that'll be based on who you are, what experience you have with the Cosmere. But we're going to go into a deep dive of the RPG to help you make that decision.
So first of all, Mark, what is the Cosmere?
All right. Well, for those of you who are watching this and you do not know what the Cosmere is, I think that you probably do not want to back this Kickstarter, most likely. Although maybe you do, and so you can keep watching. The Cosmere is sort of the Marvel Cinematic Universe equivalent of author Brandon Sanderson's novel. Brandon's worlds are all in this larger Cosmere, each of which is part of like a meta story of like some immortal being that got split up into shards, and each of them sort of creates their own magic systems on different worlds, and the different worlds have their own different sort of problems and concerns. And so each of these series is a part of the Cosmere. At first, the advertisements for this RPG said that it would be based on the Stormlight Archive series, which is sort of the epic fantasy series that is in the Cosmere, but the secret surprise when the Kickstarter was revealed was that it's got the whole thing.
But the rules that we saw so far are ones that are in that world of Roshar from...
Yes. So the rules that are in the beta are for Stormlight Archive, and they've already said that like Mistborn is not only on the way, it's also part of the Kickstarter. Scadrial. And then the idea is that they will continue to create additional worlds that are all part of the Cosmere, and that this rule set could be used sort of across those worlds. So if you want to do something where you are hopping worlds and picking up multiple types of magic systems, like the meta character that is sort of in the series and is doing that, you theoretically could do that. And you could all play together at the same table with a crossover Mistborn style metal mage person, an allomancer, or any of those other ones that are a feruchemist, and you could combine that with the people who are surge binders in Stormlight Archive. So by the way, this RPG, even the beta, which has a limited amount of world information, has some spoilers for the series, and so will this video that you're watching right now. Not major plot spoilers, but sometimes in a lot of these series, you wind up with a situation where there's some character, or even many of the characters who are kind of new to things, and so that way they can be the exposition dump character, and you learn a lot of things about the world in that way. That's a kind of fairly common situation in a Sanderson world, and some of that you're gonna not need when you've read the RPG, and also some of that information will be in this video. So we are taking comments and questions from chat.
It looks like there's a comment in chat to note that not everything that Sanderson has written is in the Cosmere.
That is correct. It is not everything he's written is in the Cosmere, like Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians and many other series that are not Cosmere series. So it's not to say that like literally anything that Sanderson writes would be in the Cosmere, but many of Sanderson's works are in the Cosmere, especially fantasy works.
And another comment, it's sort of like this person's answer, Math Guy's answer to like if you would, this would be good for you. I think if you like D20 games, pretty deep character building could be good regardless of knowing the Cosmere.
So I would say if you like D20 games, we're going to get to this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk very specifically to people and determine about whether or not this is right for you, and D20 games are going to be in it.
Mm-hmm.
I would hesitate to suggest it to people who just like literally don't know about the Cosmere and have other D20 games around, in part because some of the joy of learning about the Cosmere setting is reading the books. I would say read the books first, like maybe back it, then read the books while you're waiting, and then play it. Like,
yeah, so you get to experience the books for the first time.
Yeah, back it as a way to convince yourself that you have a timeline to read the books. But I would say, even if you love D20 games, I would hesitate to suggest like playing the RPG while just not reading any of the books. I'm sure that the world guides that are going to come out will have many more spoilers than already were in the beta. It would give away like sort of a lot of the information about the world that the characters are trying to sort of solve. So that's sort of what I'm thinking about that. We'll get into
it's because the world and the books are so good that like you don't want to.
They're really good, and so I wouldn't really recommend it in that way. But we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
I want to go through a lot more information about this book first.
So I want to talk a little bit before we get started on what is in the book as to what is currently available for folks. There's a beta rules preview, and there with some pre-gens, and there's also more information that's available on Demiplane. So we're going to be looking at both of those as we go through what we've seen.
We have looked at all of it.
We've looked at all of it.
So there is a rules preview, there is a demo adventure, there are pre-gens for the demo adventure, there is Demiplane character building for the 6 non-magical paths, and then for 2 of the types of magic users that are in the world of Roshar. Now, these are not the exact 2 types that you need after the demo adventure, so you may have to finesse things around a little bit, but there's a reason, which I won't say because it's a spoiler for the plot, that those 2 types of magic users are, like, very iconic in the series and ones that make a lot of sense to include in the beta.
Looks like our camera just went out of focus.
Camera just lost focus, okay. I will do the hand thing. Okay, did that help?
Still looks a little blurry to me now, but it looked fine before. But it's a little better, I think. I'm
okay.
not sure. What do you think? Let us know in chat.
You can let us know in chat. Anyway, so let's take a look at the beta rules.
Yeah. So with regards to what we've done, we read through this. We played the demo adventure with a group.
We gathered a group of players to play together. We listened and collected their feedback. They have different feedback than we do. I'm generally more positive about the system than like one of the playtesters was, and so I will make clear what I like about the system and what that playtester had issues with about the system when we get into the later parts.
I think that
looks clearer. I think Linda's hand was less blurry than my hand. Maybe my hand is just a blurry hand. So
when we did the playtest initially,
there's ways out of the combats in the playtest, and the initial playtest avoided all of the combats, and so then we went through and did all of the combats as well.
Yes.
So we have the peace run and the war run of the playtest available, and we will get into that for you. So at its heart, as sort of spoilered, not really a spoiler though, on like plot spoilers in some of the comments in the live stream, this is a D20 based system. You'll find familiarity with things from Pathfinder 2nd edition, from 5th edition, and also from Shadows of the Demon Lord by Rob Schwab. So you should take a look at this game, understanding that if you do not like D20 based systems at all, this is probably not the right system for you. If D20 is your thing, or you're in a comfortable space with that, that could be good for you here. So the beta rules actually doesn't have most of the character building in it. And in fact, Demiplane is the place to find some of the character building, and there's a lot of information that's only going to be in the final. What exists of the beta rules, though, is in a state that is essentially ready to go unless they need to make changes based on playtesting. And a lot of what's in there is very slick and nice. They said it hasn't been completely copy edited yet. There's certainly a few like hitches and stumbles sometimes in some of the things that can happen during the big scenes, which are like combat, but there's some that aren't combat. There's a few things that probably need a little bit more playtesting and just slight tweaking, but a lot of it looks like it's pretty close, and they just need to use the beta results to refine it, rather than that, like, if you look at it, it won't look like it's just something that is an alpha where they're just trying something out and things are a bit shaky. It's definitely absolutely very put together. So, essentially, you're going to always be rolling your D20. Just like most D20 systems, you add your modifier, you go against a particular DC difficulty class, and you hit that difficulty class, then you succeed. If you don't, then you failed.
But there is another die, a plot die.
There's more to the D20 before we get to the plot die. Linda is correct, and that was the next thing we need to talk about, but we need to talk a little bit more about what you can do with the D20, because there's a couple more things.
Yeah, fair enough.
And one of the things is, Linda did this as a player. She knows all of the character building information and the playtest. Whereas I read the GM rules and some of the other sections in the book.
Right.
So there's two things. One of which is the D20, the natural 20, and the natural 1, which is going to get into that plot die that we're going to mention later. The natural 20, when you roll it, you not only succeed, you also get an opportunity to do some cool other thing. A natural 1, you not only fail, there's a complication, some other bad side thing happens. Also, there's some description in the rules about degrees of success. They're not like standardized like Pathfinder 2, where when you succeed by 10 or fail by 10, you get a different result, but it instead says, think about how much you succeeded or failed by, and you might give additional results if you succeed or fail by a lot. The playtest adventure is one of the ways we can interrogate how these rules are used. Now, I'm going to say that, and then I'm going to do it during this episode, but I want to caveat that the playtest adventures, obviously everybody looks at the playtest adventures, but sometimes the people who are writing it are doing their best for the playtest adventure, but like it doesn't encapsulate exactly what all the designers would have thought of as like the platonic ideal of play, right? However, it is a way that we see that things are, and in that playtest adventure, there are a few situations where they call out degrees of success. By if you succeed by enough more, you get 2 barrels of water instead of 1 barrel of water, for example.
Yeah. So there's an idea of different levels of success as well, and what happens with the plot die. And the plot die is another die, a D6 that you roll alongside your D20 if there are generally some kind of stakes to the situation. Are you firing into melee? Are you trying to intimidate someone who might who might respond with anger to your attempt? That sort of thing. And on the plot die, there are 2 results that are, nothing happens. It's just a normal roll. There are 2 results where you gain an opportunity, and we'll talk more about what opportunities do in a minute. And there are 2 results where you get a bonus on your D20 roll. Great! But a 2 or a 4, but you also receive a complication.
That's right. So you roll a plot die when you're raising the stakes. The book says that should be about 30% of rolls. And it's when it's something that is higher stakes than usual for the situation. Like, obviously, in combat, all of the stakes are raised. But we took that to mean, especially with the examples in the adventure, that in combat, if you're doing your usual thing, this is your routine, you're the leader person, and you're like, I attack, and then because of the fact that I attack, that means that I can give people a bonus 1d4 as a free action, and if I miss, it doesn't cost focus, and you're just doing your thing. And it's like, before I do that, I'm gonna brace my weapon, and I'm gonna, get an opportunity, or not, sorry, I'm going to get an advantage. Like, if it's your usual routine, we decided that was not raising the stakes, unless it was an action that said it did.
Whereas by contrast, when we had an archer who had a broken arm and normally fought with either a two-handed weapon, a two-handed spear, or a bow, and had to, go in and use her very inaccurate punch with the broken arm.
That was raising stakes.
We decided that was raising the stakes.
That was one of the few things where I felt like it didn't really give a lot of good explanation about what isn't raising the stakes in combat, because naturally almost everything in combat seems pretty tense. But it gave some good examples of things that were raising the stakes in combat. And the adventure gives a lot of great examples of raising the stakes out of combat. And so that made it so that it was sort of 30% of the roles in combat, but it was all the same two characters that were raising the stakes most of the time. So I would want to interrogate a little bit more into that. Honestly, one of the biggest difficulties you're going to have as a GM with this system, potentially, if this is not your bag. And I like doing this overall, and so I didn't find a problem with that. But a couple of the playtesters did have some concerns about it, is figuring out when to raise the stakes, figuring out what opportunities to give, what beneficial side thing to offer. And there is a list of default ideas, and figuring out what complications to add. Again, there's also a list of default ideas of complications. One of the playtesters said that they felt that determining the complications and opportunities, especially the complications, was a bit much, and that there were a lot of complications that were showing up so often because in the adventure, certain actions you could choose would raise your stakes, and the party kept picking the ones that said in the adventure that the stakes were raised, so they had way more than 30%. With stakes raised, a lot of complications got rolled.
And I think that it's sort of a difference in how you're used to seeing things, right? Because, and this is my opinion, of course. I'm not sure if that's exactly what he was thinking, but in Pathfinder or a lot of other games, if you succeed, you just succeed, right? Whereas in this one, if you succeed and have a complication, then things don't entirely go your way, and some other things might happen. So it's a bit of a different feel. It's kind of grittier in a way, I would say, because it's oh, you succeeded, but maybe you or one of your allies wound up taking damage,
right?
As a side effect, or the opponent had some other beneficial situation happen. But it also can mean that if an opponent were to get a complication, then maybe something good happens for you,
right?
So.
As one of the other playtesters mentioned to that playtester after he said that, the other playtester was like, well, Blades in the Dark, lots of other systems, it's more likely that you'll succeed with a complication or succeed with do a partial success or something like that than do a clean success anyway. So it's not like this is the only system where you have to do that. I personally don't have any issue with that, but I wanted to make sure I shared the range and breadth of our playtesters in this stream, so I think this is cool. It gives a lot of opportunity for twists, and it's especially at its best in the playtest adventure when they do something that's not in the rules as a type of scene, and I will get to that when we get into scenes a little bit later in the rules here. We also had another playtester who said that deciding what the complications were seemed like a little bit much for them as a GM, but that they didn't think there were too many in play. Now, the person who said that they thought there were too many in play was also the archer whose bow got broken at the beginning of the playtest adventure, because that was the listed complication and they rolled it. So, it may have been a little bit of just my bow got broken, although they fixed it.
Yeah.
And they also never fired it anyway because they didn't do any combat. So, there are actions and reactions, just like in 5e and Pathfinder 2 and a lot of other games. Of note, the reactions in this game have more of a 5e 2014 style, just kind of flowing text, as opposed to a 5e 2024 or Pathfinder 2 explicit trigger and explicit effect. This means that you're sometimes going to come into adjudication questions with the reactions and just with these rules in general, where things are not quite as crisp and clean as you might want there to be to have no interpretation, but it's not a big deal. It'll be things like there was an opponent who said after they are attacked that they attack you. Or they did something, I can't remember, it may have been a graze or something like that. But the PC attacked with an ability that made it so that the person couldn't take a reaction. So the question was, what does after they are attacked mean? Does it mean after resolving the attack, after they've been targeted with the attack, after the attack roll was rolled, but before determining the results? Like, it's the kind of thing that since reactions interrupt, it could have been at any point. But it was only after everything was resolved that they lost their ability to take reactions. So it was pretty unclear whether they could take their reaction against that or not.
But I think, though, if you were playing a longer campaign with this and you had a character who had a thing that got rid of reactions, like, in practice, the GM and the player would come to an understanding of, okay, this is how this generally works, you know, the first couple times that reaction interrupt type stuff happens. So... yeah. And then you can find a way to work it out.
And even then, it's not just that it doesn't have trigger effects. Like, they could have written it the same way, but then been very clear, be like, you know, after they're attacked, they could even say, like, but before the effect, or, like, after resolving the attack.
Yeah.
So, another question of that one that isn't even if they lost a reaction is... if the attack deals enough damage to drop them, can they use that reaction? It feels like, narratively, because it was like a berserker who lashes out, it feels like they would be able to lash back at you if it dealt enough damage to drop you, which therefore indicated to me, as the GM, that I gave it the reaction, even against the thing that made them lose reactions. But as the player who makes it lose reactions, I could see them being pretty annoyed by that overall, and... the natural language of after the attack being ambiguous does kind of imply maybe it was all the way over.
I feel like the ability to that ability is very powerful to cancel all the things that ability cancels, so it feels to me more fair for it to not, like, prevent you from being able to do reactions at all if it succeeds.
That ability is kind of berserk, and we'll get to that when we go to the abilities. It's a really, really good ability.
So, the actions and reactions are kind of up here in this section. Should we talk about kind of, like, how the action economy of the game works at this point, or do you want to wait until
we can do that when we get to, like, the scenes and, like, doing combat and stuff like that. So, there's a lot of other, like, things, like, that are common in D20 RPGs, like specific beating general, or rounding down, or the GM like can rule 0 things. Let's talk about your character. A lot of the character building rules are not in the beta. Again, go to Demiplane if you want to see the character progression. It's classless. It's essentially a feat or talent tree from different... basically, there are main trees, which are kind of like the classes, but they're not classes. And then they have sub-trees. And you can go onto as many main trees and sub-trees as you want. And spend them as you level up. You always start with one that is from just the tree that you started with. So if you take, like, the scholar, you have the scholar starting one. And then if you're human, you can take another thing deeper down in your tree. Whereas if you're the other ancestry that's in this one, and I assume many ancestries will maybe work this way, they have their own tree. And instead of getting one from your classish entity, you get the one from your ancestry, and they can use that tree as well. And so...
and this follows kind of in the typical RPG tradition of humans get more of the general stuff, because humans are kind of the basic default, and we don't want to say too much about exactly how humans are, and then other ancestries have more special characteristics.
So, there's 6 attributes in the game. I really like the 6 attributes that they used, and I feel like they're, with the exception of one of them, and that one has some other mitigating factors, they're really interesting because they give you something cool for each one. So let's go through. They're not the 6 that you may be used to with D&D and Pathfinder.
One of them is strength.
It does have strength. So if you look at each of them, they tell you what thing they govern. And strength tells you right away that it governs carrying capacity, which this is not the one that I think is weaker than the other 5. Even though carrying capacity is not that useful. That's because strength sort of secretly also gives you more hit points, but it's just not listed in the attributes section. And the hit points are very good to have in this system. As we'll see when we get into the combat, it's extremely rocket taggy in certain situations, and you're going to want those hit points, so strength is pretty good. Plus, it lets you wear some pretty nice armor, and armor is also very strong. So strength is doing great. Then there's speed. So these are the 2 physical attributes. In the world of the Cosmere, there's physical, mental, and or cognitive, and then spiritual realms. And so there's each of the attributes, there are pairs that deal with each of those realms. So strength and speed are the physical ones. One thing I love is that they all add together to make your defense from that realm. So in 4th edition D&D, you just picked one of a pair. There were also pairs like this, but you would pick your best one to get your defense. And the problem with that is it super punished you if you wanted to have both that were in the pair. You were just terrible compared to a character who used exactly one from each pair. In Cosmere, it's awesome because if you want to make the character who's great at strength and speed, your physical defense is going to be really great. Good. One of your other defenses is going to be terrible. And so everything matters, even presence, which we'll get to at the end.
So physical defense was like, I know it was acting like AC. Is that kind of the main thing it does?
It does. And, but it also defends against, like, being tripped or a lot of other physical things.
So it's
or
kind
even,
of
like, being lashed to the ceiling.
So it's kind of like AC and fortitude saves and, like, maybe some of the things that Pathfinder 2nd edition would handle with athletics?
It has a lot of things like that. So
Gotcha.
Speed also determines your movement speed. If it's higher up, you get a better movement speed. So that's pretty cool. I think all of these attributes are really good. I do think that maxing strength and speed and then grabbing a talent that gives you +2 physical defense to get 18 is pretty strong. We'll get into that when we go through talents, what sort of the types of things that talents can do. So next after that is intellect. So intellect is basically going to give you more expertises, which are things that you know about that you can either automatically know if they're knowledge based, or you can try to roll if they're deeper information and nobody else can even attempt them. Or they can be expertises in weapons and to add a cool trait or remove a negative trait, or armor to add a cool trait or remove a negative trait.
So an example of that was like the expertise in spear and long spear.
And long spear was you can brace, like as if it was a shield.
And wasn't there another expertise that gave you like reach?
I think there was an expertise in short spear that removes one of the hands that you need to use or something like that.
So those are like some examples of expertise letting you do different things with weapons.
Yep. There's expertise on some weapons that can like hit your allies to make them not hit your allies. And there's a lot of cool things they can do with that. Intellect gets more. That's cool. That's a good thing for intelligence to do. So then there's willpower. So willpower is going to give you additional focus, which is very cool because focus is a meta resource other than hit points. I guess we didn't get to that yet because, in fact, they are mentioned in resources at the beginning, but the reason why strength doesn't necessarily tell you about, willpower is the recovery die, not focus. See, I was trying to do it off the top of my head.
Which one does focus?
I think it's that your top mental skill gives you focus, or something like that. We'll figure it out when we get to focus. But willpower gives you a bigger recovery die. So recovery dice are really important. They give you back resources during short rests, or as we'll get to, potentially during an encounter. If you only have a no willpower, you only have a D4. 1 to 2 is a D6, and 3 to 4, 3 being the highest you can start with, is a D8.
And resources in this case being hit points and then focus, which is, I think we maybe should just right now very broadly mention that focus is a currency that you can spend to use.
Oh no, focus is based on willpower, is right. Just
Okay.
just like hit points were secretly based on strength in a later section, focus is willpower, 2 plus willpower. So high willpower not only means you can recover more, but which lets you recover hit points in focus, but it also gives you more focus to start. Focus is used to like take reactive strike, like attack of opportunity, do 2-weapon fighting, and do a whole lot of other things.
All sorts of character abilities, and also to like resist certain bad things that could happen to your character.
That's right. And so willpower is definitely good because of what it does there, but getting expertise is good too. Next after that is going to be awareness. So awareness not only is used for some very important skills that let you sense things about the world around you, which are generally in almost any RPG that has something like perception, it's known to be one of the best skills in that RPG. I don't know if that's actually true in Cosmere, but it is in awareness. It also gives you further out senses for when your main sense is compromised. So the higher your awareness is,
I don't think I've seen that
the
before.
further you
really
can
cool.
sort of perceive with no penalty, even when you can't see. Now, when I say see, vision is by default your main sense. There are rules for if you want a character who's like Toph in Avatar, who can literally when I was on a stream with 2 of the designers, they gave Toph as an example of someone who might see by touch, because seeing by touch was in there, and that's also kind of what I was thinking of. You can make a character who kind of can't see but can sense the vibrations in the ground. The rules actually say that you don't have to. You could make a Toph character who has completely normal vision, like that doesn't have like a different vision than other people. That you didn't want to play a character with a disability, but that still uses the tremor sense as their main sense. And I actually tried to ask them about it because I was a little confused what that means with respect to, like, there's a sign 40 feet away. Can I read it?
Yeah.
If my main sense is vibrations and I don't have a disability on my sight, the rules seem to imply that I can't, because of the fact that my senses, other than the main sense, only go out to like 10 feet or wherever the other things are. So that, like, implicitly, even though it says that the disability section is separately, that you sort of do have a lessened capacity in the other senses, because it's not your main sense and it can't go at any other range. It, as the designers both said, it is all in a section that says you have to ask your GM to begin with, and so you're gonna have to work it out with your GM. But I felt that, like, the rules themselves didn't do a complete job of describing to me what I couldn't do when I switched to the other senses. And they seemed to imply that I had normal vision, but that also I couldn't use vision at that distance. You'll be able to figure that out. And honestly, I think in most cases, you're just going to use vision as your primary sense. It works great when you use vision as your primary sense.
Well,
you don't have to worry about, like, not being able to target creatures, invisibility and darkness causing serious problems like they do in a lot of other RPGs, mischances, anything like that.
Yeah, I thought that it was really cool when we had it come up and it's like, oh, I can only properly see about 10 feet. That's going to be a real problem for my archer. Okay, I guess I'm going to be doing this kind of thing instead.
Yes. And Rohit said Rohit was also very confused by the senses. I was. I did feel like when I was talking to the designers about it, and they were kind of like, no, this is like a role-playing thing. It's not about min-maxing. They didn't technically exactly say min-maxing, and I didn't even ask about the fact that having an intuition sense, I kind of used that as an example because it was in the book that you might have a sixth sense. The fact that it won't be, like, blocked most of the time, whereas, like, vision will be blocked much more often. They kind of got into that, and they were like, yeah, obviously this is going to be better most of the time, but it should be more about the story than min-maxing. Whether it's about min-maxing or the story, I felt like I still wasn't equipped with all the tools that I needed to do one of those alternate ones if I wasn't having a disability in vision. But I don't think you need to do that in 90% of games, and I love the way that the backup senses works. It's way better than having to deal with mischances and just like, you can't target me at all because of the fact that I was hiding from you. And it's a cool thing for that stat to do. I like awareness being a stat. Okay, so we got into Now we get into the last stat, presence. I think that presence is the weakest stat by a potentially significant amount. However, it has really good skills, like, the persuasive kind of skills. And, at least in the magic system in this world, and that may not be true in the other worlds, it can be pretty important, particularly for the 2 types of casters that are in the beta rules. That's because of the fact that magic is skill-based. We'll get into that later, but one of the casters is awareness presence, and the other one is presence willpower. And so both of the ones you can currently play right now, kind of, if you completely dump your presence, you're going to be bad at one of your 2 types of magic.
But I think it makes sense for your charisma and your bearing and that kind of thing to, as it says here, to matter for making, and since this is about establishing and making connections.
Yes. So here's the thing about the connections. It's actually an interesting idea for something to do with presence. And basically the idea is that if you don't have it, it takes a year to make it connections. And if you have 1 to 2, it's 50 days. And 3, which is the most you can have to start, is 5 days. So the person who maxed it out can get new connections after 5 days.
I was
in
just
an area.
laughing at the highest in the chart, 9+. Your reputation precedes you. You have connections in places you haven't even visited.
Yeah, I really like some of these charts and the way that they go up. Of course, you can't normally have 9 as a player character, but it is really funny. So the thing about connections that can be a bit of a tricky situation is that sometimes when you want to establish a connection, the GM is going to give you a connection anyway. Like, at first I thought maybe, you needed this to, for instance, attract the little spren, which are, a type of creature that you use to get your magic. But that is done through a different way. And there's a thing called goals that comes in later on as well that we'll get into a little bit as well, where your goal could also be to get a connection or to get an item or something else. And where certain goals are ones that, if you don't pick them, the GM might give it to you anyway. That could be the case with connections. On the other hand, presence has a lot of things to do with the magic system. One of the hidden things that awareness and presence both do is if you have the magic points, it's called investiture here, your pool is equal to 2 plus the higher of awareness and presence. What this means is the awareness presence caster is a little bit in a 4-ish situation, but not really, where they need both of them, but only the higher one actually helps them, whereas the presence willpower caster could dump their awareness a little bit more and focus on presence to get their investiture and willpower to, and they'll be good at both of their types of magic. All right, so defenses, as we mentioned before, they're 10 plus both of your attributes that are connected to it.
So physical, cognitive, and spiritual defenses.
That's right. There's 1 for each pair, and different effects go against them. You can usually guess what they're going to be based on that. One thing that might not be obvious to you right away is that, intimidation, because willpower is in intelligence, is in cognitive, is cognitive, whereas, being convinced in ways that aren't intimidation is spiritual. But I think you'll get the hang of that pretty quickly, and it's a clever way of connecting things that really fits with the world of the Cosmere, and I like it a lot. And so we also have health, focus, and investiture, which we've already mentioned while they were sort of coming up in the attributes. There's a stat called deflect, which is kind of like a resistance or damage reduction to physical types of damage.
That's one of the things you get from armor.
Yes, armor is the main way to get it. There's other abilities that can too. It doesn't help you against damage that's from poison that's directly to your life force, vital damage, or damage directly to your spirit damage. So those are ways to get through that deflect. So then there's a bunch of skills, and all these skills are skills that use the different attributes, and all the attributes have some skills. Unlike, say, Pathfinder 2 and D&D, where Constitution doesn't really have a lot of skills, for example. There's a good set of skills that are in all of these. And now heavy weapons and light weapons are skills.
Yes.
So keep that in mind. Certain things that you may... and your magic is skills. So certain things that may be considered, like, essential for your character are actually going to be on your list of skills. Now, when you start the game, you can get up to 2 ranks in any given skill, and you have 4 to spend. You can eventually get up to 5, and you can eventually start. You can start with 3 in an attribute. You have 12 to spend. So, for instance, if you wanted to, you could make a character with 3 might and speed, and then you're therefore or strength and speed. You're therefore really good at physical. 2 in everything else that isn't presence, and 0 in presence, and it takes you a year to get contacts when you come to a new place. Your spiritual defense is in tatters.
Yes.
In that point, but you're pretty good at a lot of things with that character, or you can distribute them 2 to everything, and then you have no strengths and no weaknesses. Your skills are a lot harder to find because you only have 4 of those. If you want to max them out, you can only max out 2. And then when you're rolling, it's generally against 10 for an easy thing, which means that you'll have a good chance of succeeding at it. 15 is kind of moderate, and then kind of goes up from there. At max, if you have 5 in an attribute, it can be buffed by magic and other things, but 5 is the most you can build into it. And 5 in the skill, you'd have plus 10.
Yeah.
And that's at like much higher level when the maximum for both the attributes and the skills is raised.
So you're not really gonna have a character who's guaranteed to succeed at things.
Yes.
In this system.
So we talked about expertise already. They're a thing that lets you automatically know basic stuff for your expertise that other people would have had to roll. And then you can roll to know in-depth knowledge. Or you can use them for like weapons and armor to get special effects. So there's a whole section on all the different weapons and armor that we won't go into. They're cool. I like them. They have different weapon traits, kind of like you would see in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I love the way that expertise like reveals an additional trait. I think that is a cool way to do the same thing as like advanced weapons, but without having to create advanced weapons and just let you use the same weapon, but like know about it more. It's very, 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 very slick. And if you're looking at like, I play D20 RPGs. I don't know if I'm going to back this, but what is there in here that's great that I can use? A lot of the things, as we already said, are great, period. But that idea of, like, putting unlocks into weapons is something you could just do something similar in 5e or PF2 or any other system. You could, like, make your own house rules where you're like, I've taken every martial weapon in 5e or PF2, come up with a new thing that it gets, and then there's a feat that you could take to get the extra thing, right? You could just totally do that. It's really cool. There's also equipment, and of note, like the magic-y gear in this world is basically priceless. Some of them have listed prices, but you can't just go out and buy them. The designer said that this is part of the idea that while money like sort of can give you magic in both Mistborn and Stormlight, or used to fuel your magic, you can't actually use it to like buy magic items within a magic item economy. That's what caused them to create goals as a second sort of reward other than leveling up. Leveling up is milestone and not XP. So goals are something where you say what goal you want, and then you check little boxes, and when you get to the end, every time you like do something to advance your goal, you check a box. When you get to the end, you get your goal. This is really cool, and is a great way to do a second reward. One of the things about it, though, is that some of the examples of the goals are kind of like a little uneven. They're like between like gaining a new contact versus like getting a legendary weapon that the game says that you would normally get starting level 6 to 10. And so, and they're not like so legendary that you would think nobody should ever get them. But you could kind of, at least with what's in there, there's not a huge amount of guidance between some of those goals, some of which seem like they're much more like impactful in terms of I can't get this any other way.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, like, if you wanted to befriend like the scholar who's in the pre-gen adventure, right? If it wasn't your goal, like at the end of the pre-gen adventure, you saved her life and made her expedition succeed. If it wasn't your goal, the GM would probably say that she was your contact. In fact, it says at the end of the adventure that she is now your contact, right? Or that she might be a contact.
Yeah.
But if my goal was to befriend her, then there's like 5 pips on my sheet that I have to fill before I befriend her. So it could actually make me take longer to do it by putting a XP tracker on. It's kind of a meta like game design thing about goals, is that once you've established that it takes a certain amount to get it, it then also makes you feel a little weird if, let's say, I didn't know that I was going to get a scholar friend in this pre-gen adventure. I made up my own scholar that was not that one that I wanted to be my friend, and I had a goal with 5 steps. And then the GM is like, okay, but the other party members befriended this scholar automatically, and they checked one towards getting their super sword.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a little learning curve and balance, I think, to figure it out.
And I think that one thing that could be done for that also is considering the scope of goals and then assigning them sort of a time, cost, and complexity. So if you have something that's much easier, you could say, okay, this might be a 1 or a 2, and then something that's more complicated, maybe it's even more than 5. But then you can, the player can say what they want to do, and then you can work with them to decide, okay, that seems like a this many time ticks cost.
I agree.
And do you want to go for that?
I agree, and not only do I agree, I think that the actual full rules might even do that.
Yeah?
To be clear, we have the beta. The rules on goals were that were in this beta were so incomplete that it made me think that we don't have all the rules in it. There might be actually extremely good guidance in the final version that completely tells me how to do this and even gives those tips about, like, be careful about goals that are the kind of thing you would give for free, because it could make the person who set it as their goal feel envious about the fact that other people are getting it for free. So once we've gotten past this section, which is on sort of equipment, we get into adventuring. And this is where it gets very interesting. There's a lot of cool things that are adventuring, some of which were in the playtest adventure, but didn't show up in the adventuring section. So in general, it talks a little about role-playing, and then it talks about how scenes are the big things. They include combat, endeavors, and conversations. All 3 of those types of things have some hitches that I think are going to need to be worked out in the beta, but they all have some sort of signs of greatness. There's another type of scene that's in the adventure that is not listed here, that is fantastic and doesn't even have any hitches, and I think should be in the book. And these, I will explain that one before any of the official ones that are in there. So the adventure has situations where they're kind of like trolley problems, except for that not as contrived and not necessarily that people are going to die no matter what you do. Where it's just like, yeah, you only have a certain amount of time. There's like 8 things you probably want to do. Yeah. And they'll take skill checks to do it. Everybody go around and tell me, what did you prioritize? So those are so good for the Stormlight Archive. They're not even in this beta as a type of thing that the GM should do, but everyone should read the playtest adventure and look at that so that you can use that to write your own playtest adventures, because here's why. 1, by doing a round robin and letting everyone do something, it lets them kind of each do their own thing and show what they're good at. 2, it lets them role-play their character and show their priorities, which is important in this game and this setting, because being true to an ideal to yourself and those kind of things are what like lets you get towards the magic in the setting. And so you get to demonstrate in a crisis where there are options, and when you do this thing, you're not doing that thing. Yeah. What was your number 1 priority? And it just plays very smoothly and helps you share the spotlight very easily among people. It's easy to sort of work together. This is very easily compared to endeavors, which are one of the types of scenes that are in the book and that are not as smooth as these. I don't know what to call these trolley problem-y things. I guess I'll call them What do you think?
I don't know. They're kind of like a high pressure situation. They're like a crisis. They're
yeah, we'll call them a crisis, but they may not always be a crisis.
It's like a
What do we call it? Maybe they're sort of like a
time limited situation.
Like maybe like a pressure scene, or no. I don't know.
Oh, dilemma.
Dilemma's great, Rohit.
Dilemma's great. All right,
like moral dilemmas. We'll call them a dilemma.
Yeah.
Dilemmas, which are a fourth type of scene that exists in the playtest adventure and not described here, are absolutely just... I can't tell you how much they are a great way to describe the world of the Stormlight Archive, and they were a pleasure to play through with all of the playtesters. Although the playtester of the Archer got a little miffed at how many complications that he got. But everybody else really liked it, and like, you know, the thief who was trying to pay off her debt, like, wound up stealing from some of the bodies, and then everyone noticed that happening, and then that we just learned more about the characters from those. It's really, really good. So here are the scenes that are in the book. I'm gonna do combat last because it's the longest. I'm gonna do conversations first because it's the simplest. So conversations, they generally work, but they're very bare bones, and it's possible. They're not only very bare bones, but they're also like. It seems like they are really, really skewed in favor of the group that has a lot of people in them, and without at least more scaffolding, and maybe the final has something more to do. The way conversations work, and it's pretty cool. You can go around, do your role playing. And your role-playing might be to try to help your allies, to figure something out, to convince the other people, or just, you know, for flavor. And the way that it sort of stops it from, potentially, from being just one person who does everything, is that every time you try to convince the other person, if you fail, you do lose one focus. So if the same person keeps role-playing constantly in these conversations, they're going to run out of focus. Or even if they don't run out, do you really want to spend like 2/3 of your focus and everybody else spent none on there, and then have only a third left for like the next encounter? So that is a really kind of cool, clever way to spread things out organically without saying that, like, no. You know, some things in Pathfinder, and I kid with love because I've been part of making these, where it'll be like, you're at this tense trial, and you have to present these evidence that could determine that, like, this entire thing has been, like, some terrible thing has happened, and for some reason the judge is like, no, I've already heard from this person. I have to hear from the barbarian.
I've already heard from the lawyer.
I have already heard from the lawyer. I have to hear from the barbarian. And the lawyer's like, please, I just want to present the second piece of evidence. No, I want the barbarian to present the second piece of evidence.
Yes.
It's like, but your entire culture could explode if we don't convince you that it's going to explode. Oh, no, but if the barbarian doesn't tell me about it, then I don't want to hear about it. Linda laughs because she's been involved with even more of these than me. And
trying to come up with excuses to justify them because you want to involve lots of players, but sometimes it just does not work.
So I really like the way that happens, but I think that it maybe should be even harsher. Like, maybe it should cost focus even if you attempt it. Because here's how it works. You will attempt to influence the other person to do what you want. If you succeed, they lose 2 focus. If you fail, you lose 1 focus. Generally, that means if you're trying to convince a single NPC of something, also they sometimes, like in the adventure, they have a thing that says she's only willing to spend this much focus to resist. Because they can lose 2 focus to resist, or they can just be like, okay, I'll do it, and not spend focus.
Yeah. And
so the amount of focus you need to deal in, quote, damage is not always going to be equal to their actual maximum, because they might be like, it's not worth it to spend this much focus to stop it, so I'm gonna let them succeed. So because of that, like, if you've got 4 people, then in order to convince someone, let's say that your team has between 3 and 5 focus, because that's 2 plus 1 for your willpower, 2 plus 3 for the willpower. Your opponent has 6.
Yeah.
But they're maybe they only willing to spend 4 of it. So that means that your team of 4 people would have to get, like, 2 successes before you get enough failures that you're upset and you don't want to spend more focus.
Yeah.
So generally it's pretty easy to succeed, at least without ways of making it so that there are more things that you have to do or ways of draining more focus or more tension on the focus. But I think it's a good starting point, and it has a lot of advantages over some other conversation systems I've seen. So if it gets refined a little bit, then it's going to really be there.
For example, if like NPCs, when they're like up against a group of PCs, maybe there's like some kind of a buffer on top of their focus before they get to their actual focus, and it's like, all right, you've gotten them down, now they're actually rattled and they're needing to spend focus.
Exactly. You could be like... Well,
because PCs can't be... You know, I think that, you know, just like in a lot of systems, like, NPCs can't mind control PCs and force them to do something based on a role. So PCs are kind of just immune to that sort of thing in general. So if NPCs then have
NPCs can try to influence you.
Yeah.
And you can spend your 2 focus to not be. And if you don't have enough, the GM can never take control of your character or make you do something your character wouldn't do. Instead, they can just tell you, hey, you don't have enough focus to resist. Do you want to withdraw from this scene? Because if you stay in the scene, you could get influenced. And then you can always withdraw, and then somehow your character leaves instead of being influenced. And then that just means you can't keep trying things. And so it's kind of like you ran out of hit points, and you're out of the fight for a conversation. It's a great way to start handling this, but yes, I think it needs something like a buffer or some other thing like that. And maybe the final book will have guidance on how to set those up. Honestly, I think that other than the fact that it needs tweaks on that, it is in a very good shape.
Yeah, I could see a buffer then applying potentially to PCs too, if it's like, you know, you can introduce a buffer, and like the size of the buffer depends upon like how much does the NPC really not want to do, or the PC really not want to do what the circumstance is.
Exactly. So you could definitely set that up, or be like, this person has 3 mooks, and so they have a buffer of 2 per mook. But also, you can go influence the mooks, which is easier, and if you get them to stand down, that shatters part of the buffer. Or something like that. Anyway, there's a lot of ways to play with that. Next, let's go into endeavors. So, endeavors are not as good as dilemmas, but they are pretty similar to 4E style skill challenges in the sense that everybody goes around and you want to get a certain number of successes before a certain number of failures. So, when we ran into some issues with this. Mainly, there is a problem with certain number of successes before a certain number of failures that can be solved by making them more like dilemmas, where you have X number of chances for everybody to try.
Yeah, because the tricky bit is that with certain number of successes before a certain number of failures, order highly matters. So, like, if you're someone who's not as good at the thing, and you act and you say what you're doing before the person who's better at the thing, you're actively messing your group up. And, like, that's just a really weird social dynamic.
Not only that, but there's some indication that, like, if you have a weird special ability, like, maybe you can use it instead of rolling for some narrative purpose. Or there might be something else where it's like, well, I can use an action to give people a D4. Could I do that during the endeavor? Probably, like... If the answer is yes, and if the answer is that furthermore it skips your turn, it might even be advantageous to skip your turn because of the fact that somebody else had a higher modifier than you. And so therefore, if you're able to pass, let's say you're running away from a monster. It's like, yeah, but I don't even have to run at all because I can do that. This doubles down with a question we had about the recover action, which says it can be used once per scene, which... It's probably just only in combat, but if it can be used during endeavors...
Nick, does that mean you can restore hit points to skip your turn?
Then it might allow you to, while you're being chased by a giant monster, be like, I'm gonna stop, take a deep breath, recover my hit points and focus. And it won't be as bad as if you tried something and failed. In fact, it's maybe your best move if you're bad at the skill.
But I thought also, like, that thing that adds a D4 is something that in combat is only one action, so you can kind of keep doing it. So it does make sense that you could do it. So one thing we discussed in terms of, like, how could you modify that is, like, everybody still needs to take their turn, but if you have one of those abilities, you can spend like one extra focus to do them in the middle of.
That's a possible house rule that we came up with, is like spend more focus and you still have to take your turn.
Yeah, but you can then like that way the person who can help others is still able to do it as a part of the story.
Yes. So if you don't like the meta of the ordering here, what I recommend is when you're playing this, or even I would recommend it if they wanted to change it in the official, is changing it to be more like a dilemma, and you can figure out the math of how to do that. So let's say you have the one that is in the example. You need 6 successes before you rolled 4 failures. All right? That means that you need 6 out of 9. Okay? Because that's essentially what it is.
Yeah.
Once you've got 4 out of 9 failures, you lose. Once you have 6 out of 9 successes, you succeed. The problem is 9 is evenly divisible by 3, so as long as there's no way to skip your turn, it's actually equivalent if you have 3 characters. But if you don't, then you get into those edge issues we talked about before. So 6 out of 9 is 2 out of 3. So that just means that if you have 4 characters, you can say that they each have 3 chances and they need to get 8.
Yeah.
For example. And if you have 5 characters, they each have 3 chances and they need to get 10.
Yeah.
Right? And so those all have the same number of relative successes and failures, but it makes sure everybody gets an equal number of chances, so you don't have a weird edge case where it's like, no, Timmy, don't roll. I need to roll now because it matters which order we do this in. And now, endeavors also say, even if you've already succeeded, the GM might, like, keep going with them anyway, if like the story of how they've described the endeavor means that there should be one more roll, but then they make it very easy at the end. So there's something about it where you could be like, oh, well, I'll let Bob roll too so that everybody gets a chance. I would consider making it more like dilemmas. This is the one that caused some of our players to be a little perplexed about it in the order. They also failed the endeavor, to be clear. Whereas they really strongly succeeded at all of the dilemma style stuff and all the other skill checks in the adventure. So that could have influenced somewhat some of their opinion on it. All right. So last but not least is combat. Obviously, in D20 RPGs, combat's usually the most complicated. Okay. So
I really like how initiative and ordering works in this system.
So it's a Shadows of the Demon Lord initiative, which is actually really cool initiative. And basically, unless an enemy has a weird special ability, which one of the ones in the adventure did, play at the beginning of the round, assuming you're not surprised, the player characters can decide, do they want to go? If so, they can just act in any order, 2 actions each. If they stop saying, no, we're fine, we want the 3 actions, then it passes over to the GM, who is told, do any of my characters want to go for 2 actions? They either act or they don't. Then it goes back to the player characters who chose to wait to get the 3rd action. Then it goes back to the GM-controlled characters who chose to wait.
PCs with 2 actions, the PCs who choose to act fast to get 2 actions, opponents who choose to act fast to get 2 actions, PCs who choose to act slow to act 3 actions and get 3 actions, and then the enemies who choose to act slow to get 3 actions. So
I love this initiative system.
It's awesome because you get to decide, like, is it worth the action to go quickly?
Yes. There's also cool things you can do, like if you have a buff that lasts until the beginning of your next turn, you could go fast and then slow on the next turn to make it last for the maximum amount. When I talked about this and said that I thought that it was cool for that. Now, there are some things that last exactly 1 round, and the game has to be like, remember which phase you're in. I think that's one of the more complicated tracking things, but lead designer Andrew Fisher said almost all of them are until your next turn, which he said was a little bit, to him, maybe a little gamey on the timing of it. And I said I thought it was a feature and not a bug, that it was kind of cool. He said there are other things about the initiative system that, like, if I did it, that I might see were, like, a little bit, felt a little bit weird, like, in that way, and not always this features, not bugs. He was right. And we'll get into that when we talk about how we play tested the combats, which I think we might as well do after we describe the rest of the things in combats. Because he was... I still think the duration thing isn't, but are a couple things in combat that he's right on the nose about it. I'm not sure exactly how to fix them. You might just have to be like, that's just how it is.
So when it comes to actions in combat, one of the features of actions in this game is that you can't just like keep smacking someone over and over again with your multiple actions. You can take each action once per round.
Except for if
you have like some special abilities.
No, there are a few actions
or
like
moving,
like moving or interacting that you can take multiple times. By default, every action in this RPG cannot be taken more than once. You get 3 actions or 2 actions per round, depending on if you acted fast or slow, and you cannot repeat them. This gets rid of multiple attack penalty from Pathfinder 2 because you already can't attack multiple times unless you're paying for it. With focus and a 2-weapon fighting, that costs resources every time you do it. Or with a powerful ability that you took at a much deeper level on your tree that lets you attack multiple times.
And so then, for example, if you on your turn are like, okay, I'm already next to my enemy, I'm probably just going to take a simple turn, I'm going to like attack, and then I'm going to do a shield brace. Yeah, I'm going to, brace myself. Then maybe you don't need that third action, and so it's like, I just want to go fast. Or maybe if you're like, oh yeah, I want to try to gain advantage, and I need to move into position, I need to do this thing, because I currently have disadvantage on this attack, and that's going to be a problem, then maybe you really need that third action.
Absolutely. And so, basically, what you do on your turn is some combination of 2 or 3 actions, and they have to be different actions in general. So you're always going to be looking for good things to do with your actions. I think a fairly stereotypical turn for someone who has a shield or a long spear they can brace with might be to, if they didn't need to move, to take an advantage, gain an advantage using a skill, try to gain an advantage, then make an attack, then brace. Bracing is like raising a shield. It lasts until you move or attack. Technically, if you don't attack on the next turn, you can keep the benefits of the brace, but often you will attack, so you gain advantage, attack, and then brace. There are a lot of other things you can do depending on what special abilities you have.
So gaining advantage generally is a broad ability where you can roll some kind of a skill test to try to gain advantage. It needs to be different from what you're trying to gain advantage on afterwards. So like you can't be like, I'm going to use an attack roll with the heavy weapons to do better on my next heavy weapons check, but you can be talking about like doing a feint or so this is going to cover a lot of that. There's a lot of flexibility with what kind of skills you can use there to try to do that and to customize your character style in that way.
That's right. And that you can also grapple and shove, and they just cost 2 actions. So another thing you could do if you don't want to gain advantage and brace is attack and grapple. Or attack and shove, or strike and shove. So this is pretty clear-cut, especially if you're used to 3-action systems, and it works pretty well. Brace gives the enemy disadvantage against you, which is really good. I will point out the advantage and disadvantage. I should have done this at the beginning. I like it a lot more than the way 5e does it, but it is more complicated. Because they can cancel each other out, which I like, because I kind of don't like the idea that once you've done one thing to gain advantage, there's no point in doing anything else. So if you're an elf in the woods and they get advantage in the woods, then it's like, well, no reason to go to a sneaky area. In this game, you can get multiple advantages, and you can use them on the plot die. If you have 2 advantages, you can use one on the plot die and one on the d20. If you have one, you can pick which one to use it on. If both apply. If you got an extra d4 from the leader and you have a third advantage, you can use the advantage on the d4. The advantage is
roll twice, take whichever one you prefer.
Yes.
Which in the case of the, generally with the d20, it's like, okay, yeah, roll twice, take the higher. But with the plot die, it can be interesting because you might decide that you want to take the result that gives you a +4 bonus, but also a complication so that your check is going to succeed.
Yes, it's not take the higher, it's take the one that you want.
Yes, and disadvantage is, roll twice.
And your opponent takes the one that they want.
The one they would like you to have.
That's right. Which sometimes could mean giving the opponent an opportunity so that they don't get the +4 and succeed at their check. Which is very, very interesting, and I like that a lot. So, There's also reactions such as Reactive Strike, which costs 1 focus and basically works like you would expect in Pathfinder 2 Remaster. There's Aid, which also costs 1 focus and gives an advantage to your ally. There's Avoid Danger, where you use agility to try to like avoid certain things like being falling or being gravitationally pulled up by someone who controls gravity. Dodge, which costs 1 focus and gives the opponent disadvantage on their attack roll right before they attack you. Those kind of things. These are all the ones I've said. I think are really good, and they work.
I feel like I should have used some of that. Probably
they work really well. No, I don't think dodge would have helped you that much.
When I was dying.
I don't think it actually would have helped that much because of the fact that grazes were too much of an issue.
Yeah, grazes.
It would have helped a little,
it doesn't matter because Rage would have gotten through that, yeah.
But the problem was grazes. So, there is one thing that I found a little wonky. Linda and I had some trouble with it, and it led to the thing that Andrew was talking about. So, recover. So, normally, if you have a short time to rest, you can recover your recovery die, distribute it between your focus and your hit points. If someone has medicine, they can add their medicine to that result as well, instead of resting on their own. And long rest, you recover everything. Cool. That works. The recover takes 2 actions, so that's a big amount. That's like your whole turn on a fast turn, or almost all your turn on a slow turn. And you roll your recovery die to recover health or focus, and/or focus. You can combine them once per scene. So first of all, does that mean I can use them in the other kinds of scenes? I don't know. I'm going to assume no, because it would actually cost almost nothing to use them in the other kinds of scenes, and in some cases be to your advantage. Now, if you created endeavors that work where everybody gets 1 turn to do the endeavor, or every gets 3 turns, you need 10 successes. And
it's like
does another number of failures? Like, yeah, you can skip your attempt. Is that going to help you get 10 successes? No. But you can recover. Then I think I would allow that. It's like, yeah, you weren't running. Another way to do that in the default version is to give an automatic free failure and let them do a recover. I don't know. It doesn't say. It's probably meant for combat. But here's the issue with it in combat. We ran into this one. Have you ever played a JRPG or a CRPG where your characters have infinite healing in combat? And so, at the end of the fight, you have, like, 1 enemy on the ropes. And so, you just kind of just heal as much as you can. And then you drop them with the final hit after that's done. Well, the recover action is kind of like that. Now, maybe once per scene means that after the scene is over, that you can just do it anyway. In which case, it's just like...
Recover once per battle.
But I think then they would just have said that you get a free short rest after every battle if you didn't recover or something like that.
So then there's a weird thing where it's like, well, if somebody's injured and they haven't recovered yet, it's like, wait, hold on, we need to string along this enemy so that people can try to recover.
Yes, one of the player talents makes it clear that determining the enemy's health is something that, like, you have to have a special thing that almost nobody will have, and then spend an action, and then roll a check, and then succeed. So maybe you don't know that they're low, but I think there's a lot of situations where you'll have a sense that they're low, even if the GM doesn't describe it. It's like, can I look at their wounds? I'm not telling you. You don't have that talent.
But we've successfully hit them several times.
We've hit them for
like... One who's left.
It's like we've hit them for 20 though, and the other one that was the same guy dropped at 22. Well, but in this RPG, and this is true, there's a varying number of hit points.
Which I like that because then you don't know exactly
along a range, so they might not have 22. But regardless, it is far to your advantage. And this happened in one of the fights where, like, there was 1 opponent left and they were obviously low. So everybody on the PC's team acted fast. And they basically did, like, recover. They left 2 people in case the first one rolled a bad graze that wasn't enough to finish the fight.
Yeah.
They left 2 people to kill it. Recover, attack. And then it turned out the last one could have recovered too.
Yeah.
So that is one of those gamey things that I think that Andrew may have been talking about in terms of initiative ordering, where you order your initiative in such a way that, like, you just suddenly recover at the end and keep the enemy active. I think there could be a way to get around that where recover was once per short rest instead of once per scene, and you could use it out of
yeah.
You can use it out of combat.
And then the in-combat version is just like, okay, I need the hit points now, so I'm spending my turn.
And then you can't use it again until a short rest. There's numerous ways to adjust that. It's really the only action that we had some issues with out of these basic actions. Now, there are also other actions you can take that are in combat, but you'll get them from your character advancement. So before we get into talking about like the sort of the balance of the combat and some of the other things that happen with combat, I want to talk for a moment about the character advancement so that you can understand what kind of things you're going to get. So generally, I would say that the abilities, and Linda, you can tell me if you think there's another category of these. The abilities you can gain when you level up come into one of three buckets, and almost all of them are really cool at what they do, but unfortunately they cost the same kind of resource and they're very different. One of them is
increase your raw numbers.
Increase raw numbers. Like get +2 to 2 defenses. Very, very strong. Kind of actually maybe the least interesting, but very powerful. The kind of thing Pathfinder 1 feats would do all the time that we tried to put into fewer Pathfinder 2 feats because they're so good, but they're not as interesting. Then things that give you a new special action or allow you to use your other actions or dice in an unusual way that you could never have done before. Then third is like kind of ribbony things where you are just like extremely good at like talking to politicians or something like that. And it's like, if that's the thing that you want to do in your adventure, it's written well to make that work in the adventure. It's kind of sad that it costs the same resource as going into something that was that you might have been spending towards like your main shtick, like your magic spellcasting or your sort of combat abilities. But I found that of the talents, other than the fact that the ribbony ones were like kind of put up against the other ones, pretty much all of them, except for like one out of like they shared 2/3 of them when it comes to the non-magic, and for the magic they shared less than that. They how many types of special ability do they have in total in Roshar? I don't remember. But they shared 2 of the types of casters, each of which have 2 of the special abilities. And then there's sort of a wheel where, like, if you're next to that type of caster, you share one special ability, then have another.
I see.
So
okay. But like
we
in
had
general,
four of the magics are in here.
And generally, the way the character advancement thing is organized is it's a tree where you need to like take the prerequisite to go down into the thing. So I can see some of those ribbon things potentially working if it's like you have to go through this ribbon to get the more powerful thing that's down below. So it's sort of like a 2 cost.
However, sometimes they're in a separate tree branch, and so they're actually actively preventing you from going down onto the things that are beneath them. I generally liked everything that was in there except the scholar ability that is on the scholar pregen. And that's because it had kind of a logistical hurdle. It's an ability that in any times in a TTRPG, I kind of always run into some issues with it. We saw it in actually the closed Starfinder beta. There were some things with this that we've talked about before and at Paizo. But basically, it is you roll a check, and then it takes your action. If you succeed, the GM tells you what that NPC or enemy that you've picked is gonna like do on their next turn. The GM thinks if the situation doesn't change by then. So the problem with that is that the GM has to guess what they're gonna do, and then the other problem with that is that it's almost definitely true that the situation is gonna change by then. And it even encourages you to use it near the end of the turn, like for the next round. And so the situation will almost definitely have changed by then because all of your fast phase allies will have acted. So, like, there's like maybe almost 100 abilities in there, and that's the only one that I didn't like. I think that these are cool. You'll have a lot of options. Some of them are very, very powerful, though.
Yes.
And Linda was talking about one of those.
Especially the one. So the one that one of the pregens has also, which is one where you basically punch somebody, and You raise the stakes. You're gonna have one of these plot die in there, but if you successfully hit them with the whammy, then they wind up with a condition that reduces them down to not being able to use reactions, and also like losing a regular action.
They lose two actions
and their reactions, so they just have one action. So they have to act in the slow phase with one action.
Yes.
It's very, and also like if you have an opportunity, you can steal one of their things that they're not like actively wielding at the time.
Correct.
So it's very, very strong.
Yeah, there's another thing about it that's even stronger. Actually,
even stronger than making them lose like all of their actions.
There's nothing that's actually even stronger than there's something that makes it even stronger because it also exists in it. It was already one of the best abilities that you could possibly get at first level. Mm-hmm. So the other thing about it is that it's an unarmed attack with so it uses thievery that against their cognitive defense, which could be a weaker defense, but it's not a strike.
Yes, that's true.
That means that you can also use a strike.
Mm-hmm.
So if you build a character, I think the strongest builds and one most likely to succeed well at the encounter that was very, very hard, that's at the end of the playtest adventure, would be going 3 strength, 3 speed. You need 3 speed and 2 in thievery so that you can be good at your cheap shot, and 2 in athletics so you can be good at unarmed attacks normally. Mm-hmm. That will allow you to do 1d4 plus 5 with your punch. Mm-hmm. And so then at that point, you do a regular punch for a d4 plus 5 in addition to this thievery against cognitive punch for a d4 plus 5 that also stuns them. And you also have very high physical. You have 16 physical defense on that build. It's a very powerful ability, and it's much more powerful than some of the other choices that are around there. It is, when it works, the enemies are wrecked, and you can just keep using it. And when it doesn't work, your team can get in trouble because there's a little bit of rocket tag.
Yeah.
I don't think it's even necessarily the case that it's overpowered for the game, but it's definitely much better than not having it.
Yes. Another ability that we saw in the playtest that I really liked is an ability where you can and the character that can give people an extra D4 on their stuff. You make a strike, and then you can spend a focus to give someone a D4 like as a part of that action. But if your strike failed, then you don't have to spend focus to give them a D4. So it's kind of like I missed, but at least I don't have to spend focus.
And it saves you the action.
And it saves you the action of
needing
to give the thing. So I liked that design because it felt like, it saves you the action economy, and if your attack failed, then at least there's kind of the consolation of you don't have to spend the resource.
I also really like the warriors +1 deflect, and then all attacks against other from enemies. It's attacks against allies that are in my reach from enemies that are also in my reach.
Yeah.
Take an extra action to do. Mm-hmm. And so that was really cool for positioning, and especially when you definitely want to have a reach weapon.
Yeah.
In fact, it's very important to have a reach weapon when you're doing this. Mm-hmm. And so with that reach weapon, it allows that character, when you combine it with the stun, it means that nobody who's in melee can attack anything except for the person who has even more deflect. Mm-hmm. And it is not only a cool combo, it's a really cool and interesting defensive ability, and I liked it a lot. There's a lot of fun, cool abilities that are like that are in this game, and I think you should check them out.
Yeah, and like the Archer had one where they spend, where they have a quarry, and they spent their 3 actions to like shoot a target and then mark them as their quarry.
And then they get advantage for the rest of the fight.
But that does mean, it's a 3-action thing. I gotta act in the slow phase to do my 3-action thing. So even just the abilities that we saw with the playtest characters, there was a lot of fascinating tactics going on, and a lot of choices you can make with your character. And because you can then customize going down all these branches, you can decide, do I want to pick up the abilities from a lot of different paths, or do I want to focus, or do I want to specialize? Do I want to try to build down to something farther? There's a lot of flexibility with class building or like character building that then leads to a lot of flexibility with how you can have teams function and play.
That's right. And some of the deeper tree abilities are very strong. There's one interaction that I think may cause one of the classes to be able to do a thing that causes each of your allies to make each of your other allies gain large amounts of focus, so that basically it regenerates way more than the entire pool of everybody except you. There's just some wild, interesting things. If you're wondering about the magic system, you can only get that starting at 2nd level at the earliest if you fit the plot devices of having befriended the type of creature that you need to do to get that. I'm trying to not be super spoilery to the setting here. Gaining that magic system with the very first talent to like become one of these types of surge binders is in general very strong compared to like an average talent. Now some of the other talents might be like Cheap Shot is very, very strong, but you gain like almost like 10 things when you first get it. So it's definitely to your advantage to take some of those things are small, like you can use your focus to have your little friend like do a thing. But two of them are like very broad and flexible uses of magic, which is like, yeah, you can just make whatever illusions you want with these 3 limitations, which there are later things to remove the limitations or to make them easier. Once you have the magic, the other level up things that are after that, I think are like good and balanced in a framework with the other things you can take from the non-magical trees. But it's definitely true that you get a lot more juice out of taking that first one than you would from the other things, and I think that's intentional. Honestly, in the Cosmere books, in the Stormlight books, the portrayal of one of the characters who I won't name, who is like the only one who's not getting magic, and all the other main characters are getting magic, is like the psychological effect on this character is one of the best sort of portrayals of caster martial disparity, but like, and what it feels like a real character who's dealing with it. And it's like, what can I do though? What is something I especially can do? All these other people are like doing these wild and ridiculous things. I really like that character and that characterization. And so, like, you could choose not to, and you can get cool stuff. Some of the really strong things are down at the bottom of the tree, and you'll get there a level sooner than everybody else if you didn't take that. Because sometimes the one thing you want is more valuable than getting 10 things, some of which you didn't want, right? And so, there's just a lot. Rohit says that he loves that we're using generic terms for everything to try to avoid major spoilers. I also just think it's easier for people to understand.
If we don't go into the proper nouns, like
if they're not
magic friends.
If they're not in like completely into the series. All right, and we have a chat replay, but if you don't want spoilers for the names of characters, then don't read the chat completely starting at this point, because there is a character name. Because other people like that character that I mentioned too. He's a great character. Great book series. You should read it. Whether or not the answer to this question is that you should play the game, which I also think you should at least try this beta, you should read the series because it's a fantastic series. So, where are we at now that we mentioned all of these things? In the combats, there are 3 combats. One of them is obviously harder, because the first combat is, no matter how many PCs you have, with 4 being the default, but it goes from 3 to 6, you fight one enemy who's supposedly about as strong as one PC, and then one minion.
Yes.
Who also surrenders if you beat the one who you obviously is the main antagonist. The second one is with one of those types of things that's like about as strong as a PC with no minion, and then the third one has 3 of those.
Yes.
Like about as strong as a PC. So it has 3 for 3 or 4 players. Then it has 4 for 5 players and 5 for 6 players. Playing with 4 players and having 3 is actually the best ratio for the party. 3 to 4 enemies is the best ratio for the party that you can possibly have.
We initially thought we TPK'd until we then went back and looked at the things about like how you can come back with injuries, and we wound up having 1 dead character and 2 like horrifically maimed characters and 1 character that was
let's get into that. Let's get into that.
Yeah.
In the first fight, they came within like 1 damage of ending it with a flawless victory. Because they did not quite They stunned the one enemy, the main enemy, who says that he acts in the fast phase, but I chose to have him act in the slow phase when he was going to get 0 actions in the fast phase. And they stunned him, and then they got him down to like 1. And then he attacked, his buddy attacked, and then they immediately dropped him in the after using recovery. They immediately dropped him in the next the next
one
turn.
of our allies got hurt due to a complication from one of our own rolls, and that was basically it.
That was the only main thing that happened. It was quick, it was over fast, and that was done. Then the second fight, the enemy got 1 turn during the fast phase because of the fact they were non-humanoid, and we realized that they couldn't use cheap shot, which only works against humanoids. Because at first, Linda used cheap shots, and they just it looked like it was just over. And
then I read my ability more closely and was like, wait, no. So yeah, in this test, I was all the characters and Mark was the GM because we played legitimately with the
players were
people,
gone.
And then they piece ran it.
The players were gone when they had piece ran it.
Yeah.
So we realized that you couldn't use cheap shot, and so the enemy got 1 turn, did a small amount of vital damage to 2 characters, and then died.
We did the usual thing where we're like, oh, this is only going to take 2 hours, and we played for 3 hours. People were able to stay a little longer to do that, but they weren't able to stay to go back and go through all the combats. So.
Yep. So then we did the final fight. So the final fight is very challenging, or at least it's very rocket taggy. And it was, at first, Linda was like, oh wait, we both thought it was a TPK, but then I pointed out that on the turn, right before it was obvious that the last guy was going to get defeated, because it was obvious that all 3 of the other characters should have just come back. Now let me explain that, because I intentionally didn't talk about injuries, death, or dying when we were back in combat, so we can talk about them now during this TPK.
Because it makes more sense with the context,
This is, I actually, when I read it, I adored the death and dying system. When we played it, I found it was one of those other things Andrew was talking about that can get a little bit gamey. And I'll tell you why. When I read it, I was like, this is brilliant. I like it so much. And when we played it, wasn't quite as good as I had thought, but I still liked it. So the way it works is that when you go to 0, you get an injury on an injury roll. You roll a d20, and basically, regardless of how badly you roll, on your first d20 of the, like when you don't have any other injuries, you either have an injury that is just for the day and that's it on a natural 20, or that'll last 1d6 days, or that'll last 6d6 days. Alright? But once you have an injury, then if you take another injury before that one is healed, you take a -5. Now, starting on the second one, there's a chance that your injury is permanent. It's not that likely. On your third injury, you have a -10. Now, there's a 20% chance you die. That goes up to 45% on when you have a -15, and so on.
And you can clear these injuries over time if they're not permanent by
waiting for a long time, or taking enough stuff in the spellcasting talents that let you cure, including permanent injuries. So there are ways to get them back quickly if you take the right, if you spend character resources on doing that, but otherwise you can, wait and they'll go away. So they're rolled randomly on a table of what they will be. And sometimes it can be just the worst possible thing. Like
the archer having a broken arm, who only had 2-handed weapons, getting a broken arm.
Yes. So yeah, when we started the fight, what happened was, there are 2 enemies that are just absolutely brutal. Their stat block is brutal. I'll get into them. But one of them that's a little bit weaker overall, but has the ability that she takes a turn before the first fast turn in any fight, and then that doesn't count as her turn for that turn. So she used that to shoot. She was an archer. She shot the other archer, the PC archer. And then she later shot the PC archer again. During the, I think the fast phase, and dropped the PC archer, which caused an injury that broke the PC archer's one of her hands. We'll say her left hand.
Yeah.
The PC archer only had 2-handed weapons and was lousy at punching.
Yes.
So at first, Linda was like, oh, well, she's not going to come back into the fight. We eventually did bring her back in, and that was crucial to winning the fight. But it was absolutely the worst possible thing that that could have happened to that character, because move at half speed, who cares? There are some others that might have been bad, like having the vision reduced to be very close by for an archer, but losing a hand was just like that character was done.
But I also think that, you know, that wasn't necessarily the issue that I had with it, because I think that you go down. The issue that I had with it was sort of with regards to the timing of when you come back.
So let's get into that for a moment. So not only did that happen, not only did the cheap shot, the most important move on the PC side, it missed. That was very, very crucial. The other two enemies that are in the fight are absolutely vicious. They have the ability to brace without a shield, and then they have the ability
to give you disadvantage.
They have a disadvantage on your attack against them. They have the ability to attack twice, leaping 10 feet before or after the attack on both of the two attacks. And don't forget something that I forgot to mention, which is anytime you miss, you can spend 1 focus to get a graze. And both of those two enemies have 5 focus.
Yes.
And their only other ability that costs focus other than the basic focus actions is not really worth using.
So a graze means you do the damage dice, but not the bonus.
So normally you would do, say, a d8 plus 4 or 5. But with a graze, you just do the d8. However, that's about half damage.
Yeah.
Now, with deflect will deflect a lot of that d8, right? So, and
one of the characters had 3, but the rest had 1.
We rolled damage, which was actually more to the advantage of the PCs because of the fact that if you roll, then 1d8 could be 1, 2, or 3, and the character with 3 deflect might take 0.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just take 5, then you're definitely going to take damage. This is very important in a moment because you can come back with 1 hit point a lot of times, and the ability to take 0 is very good. In a starting character will either have typically 2 or 1, depending on what armor they're wearing, maybe 0. If they're a warrior in their stance, they'll have 3. I also, in an ambiguous ruling, ruled heavily in the party's favor because we were kind of thinking that this didn't make any sense, but we decided to be nice. That once you entered a stance, even if you got knocked unconscious multiple times, that you were still in the stance when you woke up. This very important for so the cheap shot missed. One of these guys who gets multiple attacks just went in, and it didn't matter what I rolled because with enough grazes, the character was out. You can just take them down automatically. So we took out the character with cheap shot, who was the only one that at the time was not so the cheap shot character, the leader who had a spear, and the warrior who had a spear had all moved up, but they hadn't had enough movement to move twice and get into a weird wedge formation.
Yeah.
So the character with cheap shot was sticking out in a space where there was one spot you could go to that was not within the reach of the warrior, but that would be able to attack the cheap shot character.
Yeah.
And so that spot was used by the enemies in order to just take down the cheap shot character, because otherwise they would have had to spend 2 actions to attack anyone except for the warrior, right? So then Linda brought back the cheap shot character. Here's how that works. I really liked it when I read it, and I liked it the first time Linda brought back the character, but later on we wound up going into some gamey things, which is how the PCs eventually won. What it is on any turn, the fast phase or the slow phase, for the players, you can declare, I was going on that phase, and my turn has been lost because I was unconscious, and I now wake up at 1. If you're healed, you can also wake up right away and actually take your next turn, although there's very few ways to be healed. And so that never happened during the combat. The problem was, when Linda woke up with the cheap shot character, she was dropped again before she could go by a graze.
This is the thing that I actually, probably like the one thing about the system that I actually didn't like actively, is that like if you choose to come back, then all of the enemies get a turn and they're just going to take you down again. You don't like have any ability to do anything about it, really.
So they might not all get a turn.
But a lot of them probably do. So like you can't like come back and then be like, okay, I'm gonna have a turn where like I try to run away or I try to recover or I try to do like some other thing. So it feels like you're just kind of like hoping that they don't go after you, but probably they are, and they're going to use a graze. They're going to take you down again automatically, and then your character just gets like more and more injured and might die. So like, I feel like that didn't really work for me.
I think there's 2 ways.
Like, it was okay because we were doing a one shot, but I didn't want to do that.
I think there's 2 ways to make it work. And they involve tactics, some of which is pretty meta-y, and this is one of the issues that we had. One of them is put pressure on them, because any enemy that's acted in the fast phase, you can wake up at the end of the PC slow phase, and they definitely can't go in the slow phase because they've gone in the fast phase. If you made the enemies all act in the fast phase for the enemies, then you can wake up in PC slow phase and then act in the next PC fast phase before anybody can go.
If you force them all to act fast.
If you force all of them to act fast.
But they weren't acting fast because they knew that they had...
They knew they were at an advantage, and they liked their 3 action brace, attack, and so they wanted to act on the slow phase at all possible times. Then there was Type 2. This is the one that won and was also really weird and was no longer the no. My character who was greedy and selfish and stole money decided to put her life on the line to come back in. That was cool when that happened. Even though when playing that way with the story, she was immediately smacked back down and achieved nothing but another injury. This is what actually worked. So the 2 who were squishy stayed down, while the 2 breastplate wielder spear people back to back fought off. They managed to defeat one of those ridiculous double attacking guys. And then they all were attacking the even more defended guy because it cost 2 actions to attack the other one. They took him down. They dropped him. And then what would have happened is they would have then killed the leader guy. But what we figured out is that on the slow phase of the PCs before the leader guy died, everybody else stood up at the same time. You do not want to have them stand up one at a time. Everybody just suddenly woke up with their injuries at 1 hit point. Now, this was too many moles to be whacked by whack-a-mole. So they did drop the spear guy that had hit points. We had gone back from TPK because we realized that we should have done this. And they dropped one of the 3. I think they actually missed, but they just used a graze, because a graze, unless you roll low on the damage and then the deflect deflects all of it, which again, the GM is allowed to not roll, in which case this would be an auto kill.
Yeah.
I think being nicer to the PCs by rolling and having a chance it would all be deflected. The graze just insta dropped someone, so then there were 2 people still up who were going to get a turn on the next turn. So at that point, the other 2 people also stand back up again. And the 2 people who were still up, I believe at that point included the person with cheap shot. So she managed to get a cheap shot on the double attack guy, which is very important. Because also the double attack guy...
The cheap shot person died in the end.
Yeah. But she did manage to get a cheap shot off before she died. Because the double attack guy can actually drop 2 of the PCs Now, what eventually happened was the archer who was missing in a hand was being ignored. So we had her stakes raised as she was punching for 4 damage against the other archer. And she kept rolling opportunities to have the other NPCs come in and hit for D8. And so she wound up actually dealing massive damage just from rolling opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, and eventually got the archer really low. And with the cheap shot on the enemy for 1 turn, on the one who made a lot of attacks, they were actually able to rush over and drop the archer enemy. But during that time, the cheap shot character died. But the most important other thing happened. The enemy who was still up ran out of focus and could no longer use grazes. Those grazes were lethal. The PC's defenses were fine, and it's 2 of them had spears that could brace. And the enemies usually missed their attacks, but they could just keep grazing and dealing lots of damage. And so at that point, they couldn't graze anymore.
And I did think that the graze mechanic was interesting. I actually liked the graze mechanic.
I think grazes were cool. I not only liked them, I liked the what were they called? The glancing blows in Pathfinder 2 Alpha that I wrote for Pathfinder 2 Alpha.
It's it's using a limited resource. I think that I think from the death and dying thing, or the injury thing, I think that if it totally makes sense to me, you do have to expend a turn not taking a turn because you're down. But I think if you did that and then you said if you come back, like at the very end of the round, so the enemies can't like punch you, one more time or whatever. And it's like you spend one round not doing anything, and then you come back and you're available. So like if the enemies have those like super hyper reactive people who can go really fast, then maybe they can like
even those only get to do that once at the beginning of the fight.
But they can't like they have to have some kind of weird ability, and otherwise like you will at least be able to be like, all right, I'm going to spend my fast phase recovering or running away or doing some other things, so that you have a way to like try to decide what you're going to do, and it doesn't feel like, oh, I'm going to go and then I'm going to cross my fingers that my character doesn't get injured. So
that's the secret of Shadows of the Demon Lord initiative, by the way. Mm-hmm. It sounds really good that, hey, the fast PCs go before the fast enemies, and the slow PCs go before the slow enemies. It sounds really good, and it is, because you get your turns before them. But in terms of doing a wombo combo, it's actually better to be able to go last. And the PCs have no way to go last. Mm-hmm. Here's why. Let's suppose that you just go flat out last during the enemy slow phase. And you want to do a wombo combo. You want to do as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So you without your enemies getting any chance to react. In order to stop this character from then also acting on the next turn in their own fast phase and getting 2 turns, the PCs need to act in the fast phase to prevent that from happening. Yeah. Now, can the PCs potentially get 2 turns if they act in the slow phase and in the fast phase? Yes, but in order to stop that, all the enemies have to do is act in the slow phase. Mm-hmm. And they get all their actions when they're stopping the PCs from taking a double turn, whereas when the PCs try to stop a double turn, they get fewer actions. Mm-hmm. So there is some advantage to be able to go first. So like it's still going first is still more of an advantage. It's still more advantage.
So, but honestly, yeah, I feel like in that case, there was we didn't have a healing character in this particular set,
but there are almost no healing characters. Yeah, like to be fair, B, it costs a lot of actions. They could have recovered for about the same action economy as the healing character, like going over and doing healing. Mm-hmm. But recover wasn't necessarily worth it either. Now, in the end, no one actually got a permanent injury. The cheap shot character died. Mm-hmm. 2 of the other characters had 3 injuries, none of permanent. Mm-hmm. But I think they were almost all the 66-day grievous ones. Yeah. And then one of the characters only had 2 injuries. Mm-hmm. He was the lucky one.
But yeah, I really think that like if coming back happened like at the very end, then that would have fixed a lot of the issues that I had with the way that felt.
It's definitely even if it happened at the very end, it's definitely very, like, much to your advantage to wait, which we discovered because it didn't work. Instead of having people come back as soon as they can, you kind of want to wait until it goes down to only, like, the tankiest possible core of your party. Yeah. Then let the tanky part of the party fight for a few rounds while they are ablating most of the damage. What if you had to decide
at that point, like after one round, you're like, okay, I'm either staying down or I'm going to get back up.
And then you bring everyone back up at the same time.
But I'm saying for the gamey thing, what if like you had to decide at that point?
But that doesn't fit the narrative as well, where sometimes you're down for a while and like your character blacks out and they need to get back and they're in their head being like, no, because in Sanderson's books, there are definitely characters who get taken out. And then they push on and they fight.
Yeah, but I guess if they were, if they were always at the end of the turn, then there would be like fewer random times during it that you could like decide. Oh, I suddenly come back here. It's like okay, the round is over. Before the new clean round. And yeah, I know that does advantage the PC somewhat, but you do have like the fact that they are automatically gonna have some kind of injury each time they do this and more of a risk of death. So,
I mean, that's just the same as allowing them to act at the beginning, to come back at the beginning of their turn, as long as the turn that they do is the fast phase, though.
That's true, but they did still lose a turn.
Not necessarily.
No, I'm saying if you mandate like okay, you lose your net, you go down and then you don't act on the next turn. Period. You lose that turn and then you come back. I guess it could be that you could call it the beginning of the next turn. Yeah.
So, like, the problem is you could lose 2 turns from that, I guess, depending on exactly how that was adjudicated. Because do you let them come back at the beginning of the next turn? Or did they come back at the beginning of the next round? Or did they come back after a round in which you give them a pseudo ghost action that they didn't act, and then at the beginning of the round after that.
Oh, I was thinking that you have. Yeah, they have kind of like a. Oh, I see. Yeah, I was thinking that. I guess I was thinking that you should like lose a turn for it, but maybe not 2 turns. And I see in chat. Yeah.
Math Guy Dave said.
I don't think the feeling waiting another friend to get knocked out so you can come up together gives the.
Yes, I definitely didn't like that feeling. That is when, as soon as we did it and it won what seemed like an impossible fight, that reminded me of what Andrew had said about some of the things with initiative being a little bit gamey, and he was right. That, to me, that and the weird recovery thing where they delayed defeating an enemy so that they could recover, both felt pretty gamey, and I'm not sure how to deal with it. But the problem is coming back one at a time, which fits the narrative, is dangerous, especially when the enemies have the ability to graze. And essentially what you're doing when you're in a near TPK situation, and again, this is a stress test in a fight that in other RPGs would have just been a TPK.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was a win. But what you're essentially doing is setting up whack-a-moles as a focus drain. And you're like, look at these 4 targets. Each of them costs 1 focus. Right?
Yeah.
Until they run out of focus. And it was very good for the party that they killed one of the 2 enemies so that the one who was doing his double swings to whack the moles ran out of focus quickly.
Yeah. Actually, if we did call it, if it was like the end of the turn or the beginning of the turn or whatever, it's like you have to take one turn that is a ghost turn that's like, okay, I have served a turn where I can't act. And then like at the beginning of the next round, the question is like, all right, of those of you who are down, who will rise?
You could do that.
Yeah.
And then you rise at the beginning of the round instead of at the end of your turn. That gives the enemies fewer chances to hit you.
Yeah.
It might be, the question is, though, it might be more powerful.
Oh, it definitely is
more
more
here's
powerful.
The thing. This didn't feel right, but it did win a fight that the PCs were kind of overmatched.
But the thing is that they can still, like, injuries are still, like, a big deal
for
your character, and they make them a lot more vulnerable later. So it's like you're coming up, it's kind of like, I guess, like, in Pathfinder, coming back up and your wounded value is going up and up. But it's even worse because, like, you have debuffs at the same time as also being more likely to permanently die.
So, but I think there's another weird thing about that timing, though, is that there could be, like, a situation where the enemies are idling. And I don't even, like, should
idling?
Yes, they're idling, and maybe they should be stabbing the unconscious bodies, which there aren't rules for in the game. I'm talking about a situation where we're using your timing. I'm thinking about this now, because Linda came up with this while we were on this show, so we hadn't talked about this before.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, okay, so let's do the situation. Palinor is there. Everybody wants to come up. They'll come up at the beginning of the next turn. And so Palinor makes his attacks. One of the enemies drops him. All the other enemies still have their turn.
Oh, I see. So
everybody is unconscious.
Yeah.
What do you do? Like, what is it? Just declared a TBK and they don't get to wake up on their next turn? Is it that the enemies are just doing nothing? Do they think they've won? But even though they haven't, and these people have actually already declared that they're going to wake up on the next turn, like,
that is interesting.
Should they be able to attack the unconscious bodies? In which case, it's even easier to kill them than if they had come back up. Like,
is it declared a TPK if everyone's unconscious at the same time, or like do enemies?
Whereas with the other version of it, you always can just, like, at the end of your turn, you wake up, and so enemies never have a situation where they're forced to idle or just, like, randomly not end the fight because of the fact that they can just skip the fast phase. Like, let's say this all happened, which happened in the slow phase, happened in the fast phase. So Palinor is dropped in the fast phase by the first enemy. Nobody else is up.
Yeah.
Next phase, slow phase. So the other 2 enemies don't go in the fast phase. Slow phase, we say, hey, do you guys want a TPK or do the other 3 of you want to wake up? Then they all say, we do wake up. at the end of the slow phase, then the other enemies say, okay, well, we attack the people who wake up.
Maybe, what if it could happen at the beginning of whichever player phase it is? So it could be at the beginning of the fast phase or the slow phase. So, and if there were enemies who still had their turns left in the fast phase because people didn't do things, then the PCs would do their slow phase turns and all those enemies would get to.
But if you have to wait until the next turn to wake up, there still could be a situation. I mean, to be fair, Linda, you're not going to find a way out of this because the situation that I'm talking about where the enemies have to skip their turn, that is like, what do we do with it, is the situation you are attempting to... Your role is created to make that happen.
Yeah.
Where the enemies don't have a target to attack.
Oh, yeah, I basically trying to make them not be able to, like, immediately attack the person who just woke up in favor of needing to attack the people who are up. But you're right that, like...
If nobody else
if nobody is up, then, yeah, it does kind of create that situation. That's interesting.
Yeah. No, it is tough. It's really hard. Game design is hard, guys. And
well, that's why I wanted to talk about this, because I wanted to be clear that, like, this is... You know, I had an issue with this, but that's not because I think this is, like, an easy type of thing. So I wanted to have a conversation with you about, like, what would I sort of see as the better thing to do there.
And when I read it, I really liked the narrative and just the mechanical feel of what I was reading. When we played it, there were some issues.
Oh, one thing that Matt was saying was maybe if you end any player phase and everyone is down, it's a TPK.
So now, Math Guy, that's what I would have said in the regular death and dying rules. In Linda's version of it, though, it's actually, because you actually have to wait until longer to wake up in order to prevent the enemies from attacking you, it's much more likely that there'll be a TPK.
Yeah, that's true, because you have
if you use that with Linda's version, then it'd actually be almost guaranteed to be a TPK when you're in a bad situation, because you're like, okay, you skip this next one, you'll wake up on the next turn, okay, we dropped that guy, then it's a TPK for sure. So...
Right.
If we use those two variants, we definitely would have TPK'd. And maybe we should have. Like, maybe the answer is, like, that's fine.
Like,
that should have been a TPK.
I feel like it did feel to me like maybe it should have been a TPK with how bad we got wrecked. But, like, I do appreciate the sort of injury system for allowing that. I feel like, this is a tricky thing.
Yeah, it's very tough. That you can see how good this system is and how well the beta is doing, that we can get into these nitty-gritty interactions. Yeah. And dive deep into them because it's got a strong foundation. There's lots of good abilities and things in the game.
Oh yeah, and I definitely had fun playing with when I talk about this is like the thing. It was like this was like the main sticking point for me.
And she would have never seen it if we actually did the peace run. In fact, here's the interesting thing. We've been giving some kind of minor vague spoilers of the adventure, but I'm just gonna say you can do a conversation to avoid this third fight. As we explained when we talked about conversations are dirt easy. You would have to be about as unlucky as humanly possible to fail the conversation. If you try it, you could choose not to. The diplomat character, pre-gen character, wants to do a conversation, but was not in our party.
Yeah.
Our party decided to do it anyway with intimidation because they just didn't feel like fighting this dangerous force of enemies. And so even though they didn't have I want to be friends with the people we're trying to kill.
Yeah, we just came up with it. We like pretended like we had a giant group of other people with us who were just about to arrive. And a cannon and a lot of other nonsense.
Some kind of Fabrial that shot off stuff. They made up all sorts of lies with deception and intimidation. It was great. But it's ridiculously easy to win that conversation, so I'm not even sure that many groups have actually fought this.
Yeah.
Encounter.
I also wonder if, like, based on the encounter balance rules, is this supposed to be like a ridiculously hard encounter?
I don't know, because it was 4 PCs versus 3 PC level thing. That's kind of like a severe encounter in Pathfinder, but I'm just saying it was brutal. It's very rocket taggy. I think that it would definitely be winnable with... and by the way, if you had 3 characters, they would face the same encounter.
Yeah.
And 5, you get more enemies, and the enemy ratio is actually higher. I still think it would be winnable if you had 2 characters with the stunning ability and 1 character with the defensive ability, and they advanced in a wedge formation, that they would be able to do it by. You have the 2 stunning characters stun the 2 guys who usually get 2 attacks.
Well, I think ultimately part of what has to do with it is, like, how much is the... the players had graze, too.
Yeah, the players have graze. Everybody has
Everybody
graze.
has graze.
Guy.
In fact, one of the characters could do graze once per round without spending focus.
That was a very good ability.
Yeah.
So basically, whether he missed or not.
Grazes. But I think that like the amount of damage that the amount of damage that Graze dealt versus like the amount of hit points that a level 1 character has is part of what just made
Correct.
it more fragile. So like
let me give
apparently the system is a system that like Pathfinder 2nd edition is more fragile when you're like first starting out.
Well, people talk about that in PF2. Your characters are way more fragile in
absolutely.
in Cosmere.
In Cosmere they are, yeah.
Than in PF2. Mm-hmm. Like for one thing, your number of hit points is probably lower. Mm-hmm. The amount of damage that enemies deal is higher. Mm-hmm. The level 1 enemies often deal like a D8 plus 4-ish. Mm-hmm. And even ranged ones deal almost that much, not quite, that were in the list of enemies. And if you look at level 1 enemies in PF2, they deal less damage than that, mm-hmm. while also you have more hit points. Not only that, but grazes. Mm-hmm. So let me give you an example. So let's say that your character is, you're starting out your first level. You are the person that has the stun ability that's the pre-gen, right? So you're starting, you have 10 plus your strength. Okay.
Math guy, yeah, deflect totally does affect that. The characters
deflect is a big deal.
It's a big deal. The characters had generally 0 or 1. One of them had 2 or could go up to 3 while in a stance.
Our group was as strong as possible because they salvaged, in that
mm-hmm.
fight, they salvaged the maximum number of breastplate, armors, mm-hmm. and weapons that they could have had. In fact, the pre-gen who didn't start with breastplate armor was the one who got up to 3. He wouldn't have been able to do that with his starting equipment. And they still lost badly. Because your maximum health is going to be 10, 11, 12, or 13 mm-hmm. at first level. That's going to be lower than most wizards in Pathfinder. Mm-hmm. You would have to work hard to build a Pathfinder wizard.
If your enemies are attacking you for, 1d8 plus 4, then...
So you probably have 10, 11, 12, or 13. In fact, you definitely do. Mm-hmm. There's some toughness things, but you pretty much can't start with those. And so if they're going to be attacking for 1d8 plus 4... in a lot of cases, that can one-shot you if it rolls high. Mm-hmm. And you could take the average, but I think that taking the average is actually in against the player's favor, because then a graze is guaranteed to drop people even if they have good deflect when they're at 1. But let's take, for example, someone who has 2 strength, so they have 12 starting hit points, mm-hmm. right? Let's say that you did take the average. Because mm-hmm. I did get some high rolls. I got some low ones, too. Let's say I took the average, and I'm these axe guys who get 2 attacks per round. There's 2 of them, right? Mm-hmm. So I have 12 hit points and 1 deflect, because I'm the roguish person. I don't have enough strength to use the 2 deflect breastplate. So my graze on the axe is 5 if I don't roll. So these 2 guys attack 4 times. I could dodge, whatever. Let's say I missed all 4 of them. Mm-hmm. Okay? I do a total of 5, 5, 5, 5, minus 1 each time. 4, 4, 4, 4. 3 of them is all that's required to drop the character, and then I have 1 left over. That's if I missed every time.
Yes.
Right? So that's what I said about it being very rocket tag-ish. Because of grazes. Mm-hmm. It causes your character... especially with the enemies that could attack twice. That mm-hmm. was very particular. But your character is just going down. And there's essentially nothing you can do about that other than the standing behind the person with the stance, which makes the attack take 2 actions. Mm-hmm. When the enemy can attack twice like that. It just, that was going to happen. And admittedly, you can come back.
Yeah.
With 1 hit point. But then a graze is going to drop you 2. Also, it probably didn't take 3 actions to drop you, because if one of those attacks hit, mm-hmm. then it only takes... then you don't get your deflect against that. It only takes 2. 1 graze and 1 hit to drop you.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, that's actually pretty typical, probabilistically, is that the enemy might hit you once and graze you once, and then you're down. And so, but the enemies actually had more hit points than that.
Yeah.
So it was actually a pretty rough fight. I wouldn't be surprised if most groups that ran that fight either lost or had to do the whack-a-mole thing that we did. Mm-hmm. All right. So Rohit says that the level 1 characters maybe don't have enough hit points for the amount of damage. Maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, that is possible. The enemy damage is very high. Just all damage is decently high, and especially when you're taking into account the graze system. I think that the enemies getting 2 attacks was a big part of it, but even if they didn't, they could have gained advantage and then done 1 attack, which I accidentally did on the first round because I missed that they had 2 attacks. It would have even been more brutal.
Yes.
That it was if I had realized that they had 2 attacks right away.
Yeah, so I'm curious to see if they wind up like increasing the starting hit points, because I do think that would probably help out a lot for the first level characters and their durability.
Even just a little bit would have gone a long way, because like Linda's character, that was the one she actually played the whole time, who had 3 deflect, could stay up pretty well, would deflect most of a graze. Right?
Yeah.
And even for a big hit, Linda's character could take that at least for a little while. But, Mad Guy Dave, exactly. Half damage is a lot for a graze. And it essentially is a D8 plus 4 turning to a D8 is basically doing half. That's why the glancing blows that system that I had for Pathfinder 2 Alpha was half minimum. So, for example, instead of being a D8 plus 4 would, or let's say a D8 plus 5 would go to 3 instead of a D8.
Yeah, and then if you had deflect 3, then you would be completely protected against that.
Correct. That was basically how I did glancing blows, because I found that doing half of normal was too much damage for a miss. Now, to be clear, this costs focus, whereas the glancing blows that I was proposing were any time you didn't miss by 10.
Yeah.
The problem is that the enemies just had 5 focus, so and I didn't have lots of other things to spend it on, so I was definitely use them to get glancing blows all the time. Absolutely.
We're talking about saying that's why spellcasters in 2E are deceptively powerful. Yeah, the whole basic save framework.
Yeah, absolutely, and the hit points are just a little bit lower here.
Yeah.
So let's get into our conclusion. Should we back this? Do you like the Cosmere? And are you okay with D20 systems or like D20 systems? If the answer to both is yes, I think that you should back this if you have the funds, right? Not everybody does. There's a lot of product in here. Some of it is very, very cool if you look at the tchotchkes you can get in this. It's pretty expensive. There are some build-your-own tiers where you could just go in and try to avoid some of the extra stuff and get only what you wanted. That probably saves you some money. But if you have the money for this product and you like those things, I think you should. If you like the books and you're not sure about the system, try the beta. It's free. You don't have much time. In fact, if you're watching this later, maybe you don't have any time, right? If you like what we've been talking about here in general and you haven't read the books, but you're like, no, but the system seems cool, and the world building that they've tried to give not that much spoilers seems cool, I would say that you can, if you have the funds, back it, and then read the books first, though. Do read the books first. That gives you a time limit, because they're long, so it'll help encourage you to read the books. But in general, since you can always try, you can always look at it, and if you're watching this and it's already past the time that you could back it, you can use this to decide whether or not you want to sort of buy the final product. I'm sure many of these little small things we talked about in the beta that gave friction are going to be smoothed out by the time they make it to the final product. Heck, if you back and you participate in the beta, you can go and be one of the people who gives this feedback and helps improve some of those sections that need to get smoothed out a bit. So, Rohit says build your own pledge is the way to go as well. So, yeah, I think that the build your own pledge is going to be a good option for people who, because some of the default ones, as you go up from the very bare bones one, once you add like some things that you probably wanted to add, they also add like a bunch of other things that you might not have if you were on a budget. But they have a robust build your own pledge, so you can be sure that you get exactly what you want. And Rohit says there's a 7-hour audiobook of Way of Kings for free. Yeah, Brandon puts a lot of things for free. There's like you can also get the entire Warbringer, which is a different world in Cosmere, for free because he like put it up chapter by chapter as he was writing it to show like what the process was or something, and it's still up for free. So there's a lot of cool things that you can do. You should check out this world, check out this setting, and check out at least the free part of this game. Mm-hmm. And I hope that you enjoyed this like deep dive analysis with playtest feedback and analyzing everything that we liked.
We spent more time like relatively speaking of like some of the friction points. I think just because like when something's awesome, we're like, yeah, that was really cool. But
we
then
just go through it quickly.
We're kind of like, like how game designer Mark, like how might we potentially like solve this, or how when I'm curious to see when the full version comes out, what's changed from the beta.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the nature of any kind of deep dive that you have to spend more time talking about the friction points because of the fact that for the other ones you can describe them and be like, this is awesome, here's a cool thing we did with it, but then you kind of are done. Whereas the friction points, you kind of have to explain. You have to set them up, tell the story, explain how they became a friction point, maybe even talk about ways you were thinking of adjusting things. And so they're going to take more of the relative time, but that's not trying to say that that we don't recommend the system. In fact, I definitely recommend it for fans of the setting. It has a lot of really cool things that will help tie in and tell stories that are similar to the ones that you've seen from the setting. Plus, and this is something that they said on the interview that I did with them on Roll for Combat, is that Brandon's very invested as like the intellectual property holder in like giving information and adding and sharing more. Other intellectual property holders sometimes hold back or like, oh, maybe don't say this. Like the lead designer Andrew had worked with Star Wars before, and he said they weren't bad to work with. They just like they naturally had their own secrets. But Brandon is like very excited and wants to add more. There's some people that I know in the industry who have said that certain IP holders are much worse even than Star Wars. Like there's one person I know who had like had people who were like had been talking with J.K. Rowling about a Harry Potter RPG, and then she was like, wait, but can players play as one of the characters in my world? And they were like, well, I mean, it's an RPG. I mean, we put statistics for them if you don't want, but I mean, like, they could choose to, like, build a version of it. It's like, no, it's done. Never. They definitely can't be able to play a character. It's one of my characters in their home RPG. It's like, and then that, like if the plug was pulled on something that was like fairly along, supposedly, from somebody who told me that. But like, Brandon is the opposite, and
that's certainly not the most ridiculous thing she said on the internet.
Certainly not. But Brandon's the opposite, and like they were sometimes going to him and being like, well, I mean, of course we probably wouldn't be able to say this thing or that thing, but we would like to say this thing and this thing. And he was like, no, we could say all of these things. Here's another cool idea for something you could put into here, or a plot line that I had that I wasn't sure how I could show it in the books. That could be in an adventure. And so like, he is apparently a great partner to work with as an RPG creator, as the IP holder, and I think that's gonna be something that makes this game in the setting very, very special, to have that strong synergy with someone who is invested and excited.
Oh yeah, Rohit putting out, you should look at the fanfic universe.
Yes, I'm sure that would be the case.
Oh my gosh, it might be a fanfic that stars trans characters. Then she'll really have a heart attack.
And yes, they are now the biggest RPG Kickstarter of all time. They have surpassed Avatar: The Last Airbender. So, yeah. Let us know in the comments what you thought. If you have any questions, and people in chat, you can always feel free to keep asking your questions. Since we've got to the end of the episode, we're going to do a vote for what the next episode will be, as we do on all episodes of Arcade Mark. This was an extra long one, as we knew it was going to be.
Because we wanted to go through
everything. We didn't want to give short shrift to the fact that we even gathered other playtesters to do like an entire playtest and hear from them. Wait, look at Linda giving away who it is.
Who what is?
Who what is? I don't know.
I'm confused. I apparently gave something away. I don't even know what I gave away.
All right.
They see 5, build a spell.
So Rohit wants to do a build a spell workshop instead of a build a hazard workshop, and has therefore voted other.
All right, 5 is build a spell.
There you go.
6 is now propose another idea.
6 is now propose another idea. Oh. Linda giving away who the author is. Oh, yes, who the author of Harry Potter is. You gave away who that is.
Yes, okay, fair enough. Mm-hmm.
So, we have 1 vote for a build a spell workshop. Does anyone else have a vote? The choices are 1, build a hazard workshop, 2, ask Arcane Mark game design Q&A, 3, GM tools, twists, and complications, 4, Arcane Mark plays. We'll vote for a game if this wins. 5 is build a spell, and 6 is other.
So far, Rohit is the only person with an opinion.
Yes, that's a very powerful tool, is being the only person with an opinion. Math Guy Dave, there's at least 14 people who are watching. So you're not the only other person who's here.
Rico has an
Rico
opinion.
voted for 3. GM
Twists
tools,
and
twists, and complications. All right.
So we have 1 vote for twists and complications, 1 vote for build a spell. Does anyone else have an opinion? Or will we be deciding that the handy D5 is...
I think the handy D5
Or D2,
is...
I guess, because there's 2 choices of people.
Yes,
yeah.
well, yes. Or D6, really.
Yeah,
but...
D6, yeah.
All right, I guess we're going to have a roll-off. Here we go. Roll-off. It's
4.
the second one.
It's the second one.
Whichever one was...
Oh,
wait.
Math Guy voted for that. Yeah.
Math Guy came in for Rohit to win.
Can I show up and make it a build a summoning spell? You can show up and propose a summoning spell, and then if it wins, then we will do it. Yes, indeed.
In fact, that'll save time because we can just be like, okay. Rank 1, level -1. Rank 2. We did it.
But it looks like it, something more interesting.
It could be like an incarnate spell.
It
looks like it looks like math and physics teamed up.
Yes.
In order to do it.
In order to make it happen.
We're gonna do build a spell.
So build a spell workshop is going to be
was
our
it?
next.
Because we rolled on it was the second one, and the one that was voted for second was actually 3.
Oh, you mapped that by the second one. I was thinking of it numerically.
Oh yeah, that's fair too.
On the list. Well,
all right,
there we go.
so our next episode is going to be
same idea. That's the main thing.
Build a spell workshop.
Make sure you
take care, everyone, and enjoy your weekend.
Bye.
Bye.